Hey everyone, welcome back to Turtle. Sit back, relax, and get ready for today's story. My girlfriend called it harmless flirting, so I showed her the screenshot she forgot to delete. I realized something was wrong early on a quiet morning when my phone lit up on the nightstand and the screen reflected against the ceiling before I was fully awake. I was not reaching for it because I trusted what I would see. I reached because I had learnt the habit of checking time and notifications before my thoughts could catch up. The message was not meant for me. It was a notification from an app I barely used, and that alone made my chest tighten. My girlfriend Selene was still asleep beside me, breathing evenly, one arm draped across my stomach like everything in our life was balanced and safe. I unlocked my phone and stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing without waking her or myself too much. The message preview showed her name, followed by a short line that ended with a winking expression. I will not describe because even thinking about it now makes my jaw tighten. I tapped it open and immediately realized it was part of a conversation thread that had been muted but not deleted. The name at the top was Riven. I knew that name. He was a co-worker from her new job, someone she had mentioned casually in stories about office lunches and after-work drinks. She always framed him as harmless, a bit dramatic maybe, a little too confident, but nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe that. I had believed it for months. I scrolled slowly, my thumb heavy, like it did not want to obey me. The messages were not explicit in the way people imagine betrayal. There were no plans written out. Clearly no declarations of love, no promises. It was worse than that. It was familiarity. Compliments stacked on compliments, inside jokes layered over private frustrations she had never shared with me. He commented on how she looked in a photo she had sent him earlier that day. A photo she never sent to me. She responded with laughing words and playful deflection that did not really deflect anything. The tone was intimate without being obvious, which somehow made it feel more intentional, more chosen. I put the phone down and stared at the wall, feeling like I had stepped into a version of my life where gravity worked differently. Selene shifted in her sleep and murmured something soft and unintelligible. For a moment I considered pretending I had never seen it. I could roll over, kiss her forehead, and let the day start like any other. That temptation scared me more than the messages themselves. It meant a part of me was willing to shrink to keep things comfortable. We had been together almost 3 years. I am in my early 30s, and she is in her late 20s. We met through mutual friends at a small gathering, and bonded over shared humor and long conversations that stretched past midnight. She had always been outgoing, charming, effortlessly, magnetic. I was steadier, quieter, more observant. We balanced each other. Or at least that is what I told myself when she brushed off concerns by laughing them away. When I asked about boundaries, she said she believed in trust, not rules. When I said some things made me uncomfortable, she told me I was reading too much into nothing. Later that morning, after she woke up and went to shower, I opened the thread again. I needed to know how far back it went. Weeks, maybe months. The tone evolved slowly, like something growing unnoticed, until it took up space you could no longer ignore. At one point, there was a message from her saying she liked the attention because it reminded her she was still interesting. That line sat in my chest like a stone. I wondered when she had stopped feeling interesting to me, or if she ever told me she felt that way. I wondered how many times I had asked how her day was while she was waiting for his replies instead. When she came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, humming softly, she noticed my expression immediately. She asked what was wrong, and I told her we needed to talk. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her. I simply asked her to sit down. She rolled her eyes slightly in that familiar way that usually meant she thought I was about to overreact. I asked her about Riven. She smiled like it was obvious, and said he was just a co-worker. I asked about the messages. She shrugged and said it was harmless flirting. Her exact words did not matter as much as the ease with which she said them. I told her I had seen the conversation. Her posture changed then. Not dramatically, but enough. She crossed her arms and leaned back, like someone preparing to defend a position they had already justified internally. She said everyone flirts a little. That it did not mean anything. That it made work more fun. She asked if I really wanted to police her interactions. I listened. I let her talk. I let her frame it as innocent and normal and insignificant. When she finished, I reached for my phone and showed her the screenshot she had forgotten to delete. The days after Selene left blurred together in a way I had never experienced before. Time did not move normally. Mornings stretched endlessly, and nights collapsed into restless half-sleep. I went to work because routine was easier than thinking, but I barely absorbed anything. Every familiar object in the apartment felt slightly out of place, as if it belonged to a version of my life that had already ended. Her mug still sat by the sink, her sweater was still hanging over the back of the chair. I did not touch any of it. I needed the space to feel honest, even if it hurt. She messaged me that first evening asking if we could talk. I did not reply right away. I read it several times, then set the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. I was not trying to punish her. I was trying to understand myself. For years I had prided myself on being calm, reasonable and trusting. Now I was forced to question whether those traits had quietly turned into avoidance. I replayed our conversations over the past year and noticed patterns I had dismissed. The way she deflected serious talks with humor, the way she framed my discomfort as insecurity, the way I accepted those explanations because conflict made me uncomfortable. When I finally responded, I told her we could talk in person the next day. She arrived late afternoon looking smaller somehow, like the confidence she carried so easily had leaked out overnight. She sat on the edge of the couch instead of beside me. That alone said more than any apology could have. She started talking immediately, filling the silence with explanations. She said the messages did not mean what they looked like. She said she never planned to act on anything. She said she felt stuck in her own head, and the attention made her feel visible. I listened again. I always listened. It was the one message she had sent late at night when she thought he was asleep. The one where she admitted she sometimes wondered what it would be like if timing were different. The one she deleted from the thread, but not from her device backups. Her face went pale when she saw it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing ready to say. The silence stretched, and in that silence I felt something settle. Not anger, not triumph. Clarity. I told her that harmless does not hide, that flirting does not erase itself, that trust does not require me to ignore my own instincts, she cried. Said she did not mean for it to go that far. Said she felt lonely sometimes, even when we were together. That line hurt more than I expected, but it also answered questions I had been afraid to ask. I did not comfort her. I did not shout. I told her we needed time apart to think honestly about what we were doing. She left that afternoon to stay with a friend. The apartment felt hollow after she closed the door. I sat on the couch and replayed everything from the beginning. Every moment I had felt uneasy and pushed it aside. Every time she told me I was imagining things. The screenshot did not end our relationship in one dramatic instant. It started the slow unraveling of illusions I had wrapped around it. And as painful as that was, I knew it was necessary. Because harmless flirting is only harmless when it does not ask you to betray yourself to accept it. When she finished, I asked her a simple question. I asked her why she had never told me she felt invisible. She stared at her hands for a long time before answering. She said she did not want to seem needy. She said she thought she should be able to manage her feelings on her own. I told her that intimacy does not work like that. That sharing the uncomfortable parts is not a weakness. It is the whole point. She nodded, but I could tell she was processing that idea rather than accepting it. I asked her about Riven again, not accusatory, just factual. She admitted the flirting had escalated. She admitted she liked the tension. She admitted she had thought about what it would be like to cross a line, even if she insisted she never would have. That distinction mattered to her more than it did to me. I told her that trust is not just about physical boundaries. It is about emotional honesty. Once that fractures, everything else becomes fragile. She cried again. This time it felt different. Less defensive. More afraid. She asked if I was going to leave her. I did not answer immediately because I did not know. I told her I needed time to decide whether what we had could be rebuilt or whether I would always wonder what she was deleting when she said goodnight. She nodded and said she understood, even though I was not sure she fully did. After she left, I sat alone and thought about what rebuilding would actually require. It would mean her acknowledging the harm without minimizing it. It would mean transparency that did not feel forced. It would mean me trusting again without constantly scanning for signs of betrayal. I was not sure either of us was ready for that work. Love alone was not enough. It never is. Consistency and accountability matter more in the long run. Over the next week, we texted occasionally. Short check-ins, practical conversations about shared expenses and logistics. The emotional distance grew clearer with each exchange. She sounded careful, measured, like someone walking through a room full of glass. I realized I was doing the same. We were both protecting ourselves instead of reaching for each other. That realization hurt, but it also clarified something important. One evening she asked if we could meet again. I agreed. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table this time, like strangers negotiating terms. She told me she had spoken to a friend who pointed out that she often sought validation externally instead of addressing her own dissatisfaction. She said she was starting to understand that pattern. I appreciated the honesty, but I also recognized the timing. Insight gained only after being caught does not erase the damage done before. I told her about my own realizations, about how I avoided confrontation, about how I had ignored my instincts because I did not want to seem controlling or jealous. I told her that showing her the screenshot was not about winning an argument, it was about finally trusting myself. She listened quietly. When I finished, she said she was sorry not just for the messages, but for dismissing my feelings when I tried to talk about them earlier. That apology landed differently. It felt real. We talked for hours that night, not circling the same arguments, but examining the structure of our relationship, where it was strong, where it was brittle. By the end, we both knew what needed to happen, even if neither of us wanted to say it out loud. We cared about each other, but care without alignment turns into resentment over time. I told her I did not think we could continue as we were. She nodded with tears in her eyes and said she felt the same. I thought a lot about how easily the word harmless had been used. Not just by Celine, but by others, before her, and probably by people after her too. It is a convenient word. It sounds gentle. It suggests innocence. But intention does not cancel impact. That was the lesson I kept circling back to. The messages were not just lines of text. They represented energy that had been redirected away from our relationship, time that had been given elsewhere, emotional space that should have been ours. Once I understood that, the situation became painfully clear. Friends reacted in different ways when I told them. Some were angry on my behalf and immediately framed her as the problem. Others tried to soften it by saying these things happen and that relationships are complicated. Both reactions missed something important. This was not about assigning blame. It was about accountability and self-respect. I did not leave because I wanted to punish her. I left because staying would have meant accepting a version of love that required me to doubt myself. Celine and I exchanged a few more messages over the next month, mostly about practical things. The lease, the remaining shared expenses, the return of a few items we had forgotten. Each interaction was polite and restrained. The familiarity was still there, but it no longer had a place to land. Eventually, even those messages stopped. The silence that followed felt final in a way that was both sad and necessary. I started therapy a few weeks later not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand myself better. I talked about my tendency to avoid conflict and how that had shaped many of my relationships. I talked about the fear of being perceived as controlling or insecure, and how that fear had kept me quiet when I should have spoken up. Naming those patterns did not instantly fix them, but it gave me a map, and having a map made the future feel less intimidating. She moved out the following weekend. We divided our lives quietly. No shouting, no dramatic exits, just the slow dismantling of shared routines. When she carried the last box to her car, she hugged me tightly and whispered that she wished things had been different. I believed her, but wishing does not rewrite choices. In the weeks that followed, I felt grief in waves. Some days I missed her laugh. Other days I felt relief so sharp it surprised me. I started paying closer attention to my own boundaries, to the way my body reacted to discomfort, to the difference between trust and denial. The screenshot she forgot to delete was not just evidence of her behavior. It was a mirror, showing me where I had been betraying myself. I do not hate her. I do not see her as a villain. People are more complicated than that. But I no longer accept harmless as an excuse for harm. Flirting that needs to be hidden is not harmless. Trust that asks you to ignore your own reality is not trust. Walking away was painful, but staying would have been worse. And for the first time in a long while, I feel aligned with myself again. The quiet after the breakup was different from the shock that came before it. It was softer but heavier, like a weight that did not crush you immediately, but settled into your chest and stayed there. I started waking up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my mind refused to stay asleep. In those early mornings, I would sit by the window with a cup of coffee and watch the streets slowly come alive. Cars passed, people walked dogs. Life continued without any regard for the fact that mine had shifted so dramatically. There was something grounding about that. Something humbling. There were moments when doubt crept back in. Moments when I wondered if I had been too rigid or too quick to walk away. But every time that happened, I returned to the same truth. Trust is not something you negotiate after it has been broken. It is something you protect before that happens. I had tried to protect it by ignoring my instincts. That never works. Instincts exist for a reason. They are not always right, but they deserve to be examined, not dismissed. As time passed, the apartment began to feel like mine again. I rearranged the furniture. I donated the clothes she left behind. I replaced the mug by the sink. These were small acts, but they mattered. They were physical reminders that change was not just emotional, it was tangible. It was happening in real time. With each adjustment, the space felt lighter. I also noticed changes in myself. I became more attentive in conversations, more willing to express discomfort even when it felt awkward. I stopped measuring my reactions against how they might be perceived and started asking whether they were honest. That shift alone made a difference. Honesty has a way of simplifying things. It strips away the noise and leaves you with something solid to stand on. I do not know what Celine took from our ending. I hope she found clarity. I hope she learned something about herself. But her growth is no longer my responsibility. Mine is. And part of that responsibility is recognizing that love should not require you to compromise your sense of reality. It should not ask you to ignore evidence in favor of reassurance. It should feel steady, not confusing. Looking back, the screenshot was not the beginning of the end. It was the moment the truth stopped hiding. It forced a conversation that had been overdue. It ended something that was already quietly unraveling. Painful as it was, I am grateful for that clarity. It saved me from staying in a situation where trust was conditional and transparency was selective. Later that night, I thought about how much effort I had once put into preserving something that no longer existed. How many times I had minimized my feelings to keep the peace. I understood then that peace built on silence is fragile. It looks calm on the surface, but cracks the moment pressure is applied. Real peace requires honesty, even when honesty is inconvenient. I also reflected on how easily doubt can be planted when someone consistently reframes your concerns. The mind wants harmony, so it looks for reasons to agree. That instinct can be useful, but it can also be dangerous. Learning to trust myself again was not about becoming suspicious or guarded. It was about listening when something felt wrong, and allowing myself to respond to that feeling without apology. New connections came into my life slowly and without drama. I did not rush into anything. I asked questions and paid attention to the answers. I noticed how people spoke about past relationships and how they handled boundaries. I noticed how they reacted when I expressed uncertainty. These observations were not tests. They were simply ways of understanding whether our values aligned. There was one conversation with a friend that stayed with me. He told me that love should feel like expansion, not contraction. That phrase settled somewhere deep. Looking back, I realized how often I had shrunk myself to fit into a narrative that was easier for someone else. I no longer wanted that. I wanted a relationship where honesty was welcomed, not tolerated. The experience changed how I view trust. Trust is not blind faith. It is confidence built through consistent behavior. It grows when words and actions align. It weakens when explanations replace accountability. Once that balance is disrupted, it takes more than reassurance to restore it. It takes change. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this. Harmless flirting is only harmless when it can exist openly, without secrecy or defensiveness. The moment it needs to be hidden, it becomes something else entirely. And when someone asks you to ignore that difference for the sake of peace, they are asking you to betray yourself. I will not do that again. I am not angry anymore. I am not bitter. I am simply more aware. And awareness is a kind of freedom. The months that followed brought a quiet confidence I had not expected. It did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments. A conversation where I spoke honestly, without rehearsing. A moment where I noticed attraction, but did not feel the urge to chase it. An evening spent alone that felt complete instead of empty. Each small experience stitched together a version of myself that felt more grounded than before. I stopped trying to rewrite the past in my head. That was a habit I had carried for years. Revisiting conversations and wondering what might have changed if I had said something differently. That kind of thinking only creates an illusion of control. The truth is that relationships reveal themselves over time no matter how carefully you manage them. People show you who they are not always through big actions, but through patterns. Once you learn to see patterns clearly, there is no unseeing them. I ran into Celine once by accident at a grocery store, not far from the apartment we used to share. The encounter was brief and polite. We exchanged a few words about work and the weather. There was no tension, and no warmth either. Just two people acknowledging a shared past without stepping back into it. When we parted, I felt relief instead of sadness. That was when I knew I had truly moved on. I am not grateful for the pain, but I am grateful for what it taught me. It clarified my standards and strengthened my voice. It reminded me that walking away can be an act of self-respect, not failure. Ending something that is misaligned creates space for something healthier to exist. When I think back to the moment I saw that screenshot, I no longer feel the sharp sting that once came with it. I see it as a turning point. A line that once crossed could not be uncrossed. And that is not a tragedy. It is simply reality. I now approach relationships with a different mindset. I am open but observant, kind but clear, willing to give trust but unwilling to negotiate my sense of self. If something feels off, I address it. If the response is dismissal, I pay attention. These are not rules born from fear. They are boundaries shaped by experience. The story did not end with confrontation or dramatic closure. It ended with understanding, with the recognition that sometimes the most important thing you can do is believe what you see, let go of what no longer serves you, and choose yourself without resentment. That is what I did. And that choice changed everything. And that's the end of today's story. Thanks for listening. And if you liked it, hit that like button and subscribe for more. See you in the next one.